Right, so today we're continuing June 2014, and this is part 2, a continuation from next week. And we're at the end of question 3. So last week we kind of left class at the middle of question 3, and I believe we had one more question to do. So good luck, read part D, and of course, how it's past papers. You all need to provide answers today, and then I will jump in to assist. So good luck, and I'm waiting for answers on this end. And whenever you chew food, I know when you break down food, right? Let me just do a quick diagram here. Let's say this is the big chunk of food here, right? So let's say eating, I don't know, some bread, right? So when you chew the bread, you're going to what? Break up the bread into smaller pieces. Now, each individual piece has a smaller area if you compare it to the whole bread. But if you were to calculate the surface area of all the pieces together and add up all the surface areas here, you would actually get a larger surface area. So chewing food actually increases the overall surface area, which means the enzymes, remember, enzymes are used to break down food, like lipase is a type of enzyme, carbohydrates and protease. Since there's more surface area now, and that's using the letter E for enzymes, right? Since there's more surface area, the enzymes have more surface area to attack and break down the food. In other words, to summarize, when you chew food, the surface area gets larger, the exposed surface area gets larger, and it makes it easier for the enzymes to attack the food and break it down. So that's the science behind that. So you kind of want to get all of that in your explanation. So everyone give my answer a read, right? And let me know if it makes sense or not. One. For part 2, in which region of the digestive system would the final state of digestion of starches occur? Well, it basically boils down, they don't even have to say starch, right? It's in which part of the body does digestion finish? Is it your mouth, because digestion actually starts in your mouth, right? Stomach, small intestines, or the large intestines? What's the final stage or area of your body where digestion occurs? A lot of people are saying it's the large intestines. No digestion happens in the large intestines. The final stage of digestion is the small intestines, right? Not the large intestines. That's very, very important to note. Also, the most amount of digestion happens in the small intestines. A lot of people think that the stomach does the most digestion. That's not true. The small intestines are like the heroes of the digestion system. The most occurs there. All right, so we're completely finished with question 3 now. Question 4 deals with sexual reproduction. Now, remember, you all had that for homework, and you had about 6 weeks to complete it. So how much of you all have your notes for sexual reproduction? Good. Right. So before we start question 4, right, let's do a brief revision. So the next question deals with mitosis and meiosis. Now, when you all had the homework videos to watch, right, I made sure and explained the clear differences between mitosis and meiosis. Now, both words start with the letter M, and it's so easy to confuse them because the words even sound the same, right? Quick question. Which one of these deals with sexual reproduction? Is it mitosis, the first one, or meiosis, the second one? Let me know in the chat. Don't guess and go back in the notes and verify. Pretend you're getting $1 million for getting it correct. Right. Sexual reproduction deals with meiosis, right? So but obviously I'm going to explain the slight differences, the huge differences between the two. So it all starts off with chromosomes. So in animals and whatnot, the chromosomes are found in which part of the cell? Are chromosomes found in the nucleus, the mitochondria, in the cell membranes? Where are the chromosomes found in a cell? And you, Daria, you have it correct. It's found in the nucleus of your cells. So the question is, cells, since nucleus live inside of the cell, because nucleus is inside of the cell, how many chromosomes live inside of the nucleus? Now that's a kind of trick question, because if I ask you how much chromosomes live inside of the nucleus of a cell, the next question you should ask is, but what kind of cell are you talking about? Because it's a trick question. Let's look at Gibby's nose here, or Gibby's the cells that make up his thumb or hand or whatnot. So we're looking at nose and his thumb there. If I were to take some of the cells that are in Gibby's nose or in his thumb, and I were to look at and count the amount of chromosomes in those types of cells, how much chromosomes will I count for his nose and thumb? Right, Abira, no. How much chromosomes exist in those types of cells? Rosita, correct. No, Tristan. Try again, right? We would find, right, I'm reading through the answers, 46 chromosomes, right? So I know some of you all are saying the answer 23, right? But the answer is 46. But where does the number 23 come from? And why are so many people saying 23? You see, half of 46 is 23, right? But it is only find 23 chromosomes in special cells, in the sex cells, cells that are responsible for directly responsible for sexual reproduction. So you find those things in sperm cells, or in women, you find it in the eggs. So a sperm cell has 23 chromosomes, and an egg cell has also 23. But the sperm has to come in contact with the eggs. So when a sperm, which has 23 chromosomes, goes inside of the eggs, 23 plus 23 will give you what? 46. And we all know when a sperm fuses with an egg, eventually a child or a baby will develop, and that baby will have 46 chromosomes in all, because half came from the man and half came from the woman, right? So that's a brief reminder there. By the way, sex cells are usually called what? Gametes, okay? Right? So whenever they speak about gametes, they're either talking about sperm cells or eggs, right? Obviously, male gametes are the sperm and female gametes are the eggs, right? So basically, all other cells in your body other than your sex cells will have 46 chromosomes. Great. So that's a little revision there. So let's talk about mitosis. Now, mitosis is how it's a method on how cells multiply. Like right now, I'm going back to your nose. Let's go back to your nose, right? Your nose, right? If you put it underneath a microscope here, I'm going to put some eyes here so you can reference it, right? Your nose is made up of trillions of cells. And remember, your nose is not a sex or organ, obviously, right? So your nose basically has nothing to do with sexual reproduction. But the point is, your nose is made up of trillions of cells. But you started off with only one cell in your nose. And obviously it replicated and it multiplied over and over until you got 1 trillion plus cells. So how do these cells multiply? Well, basically one cell will split into 2 cells. And then each of these cells will continue to split into 2 cells over and over and over. This process is called mitosis. And when cells split by mitosis, each one of them will have 46 chromosomes. So this first cell will have 46 chromosomes. When it splits into 2 more cells, each cell will have 46. And when each one splits, the point is, well, each cell is going to come out with 46 chromosomes every single time. But let's look at the process. How much of you all have this diagram in your books? You all should have it in your books. Let me know on the chat there. Right? I had spent a lot of time in the videos explaining this diagram. So let's just quickly go through this, right? So here you have a cell. Now, these little strands are your chromosomes. Now, the chromosomes are already supposed to be inside of the nucleus. I didn't draw the nucleus because then the diagram would have been too small, right? But these little chromosomes, these little strands are inside of the nucleus. Now, whenever the cell does not want to reproduce or duplicate itself, in other words, the cell is just enjoying himself and he has no plans at the moment to duplicate himself. The chromosomes are always in these thread-like structures and they're very, very difficult to see because they're very, very, very thin. But now, at some point in time, the cell is going to say, hey, it's time for me to split into 2. It's time for me to duplicate myself. At that point in time, the strands compact themselves so you can actually see them. So, you know, if you take a piece of thread and you loose it out, like it have it, how you say, if you have a thin piece of thread reeled out on a piece of table, you can't really see it. But if you take that thread and you squish it together, then it's very easy to see, hey, there's thread on the table. So that's what happens here. The thread compacts itself. And that is when it's easy to see it underneath a very powerful microscope. By the way, I did not have time to draw all 46. I only drew 1, 2, 3, 4. But this is supposed to represent the 46 chromosomes. So the chromosomes compact themselves. Again, I have 4, right? And it's time to duplicate. So what's going to happen now? Each chromosome is going to replicate itself. You notice you have 1/2 here, and it duplicates the another half on the right-hand side. What's going to happen now? Each chromosome is going to line up on top of each other, right? And what's going to happen? It's going to split down the middle, which means half of the chromosome is going to go on this side, and the other half, its copy, it's going to go on its other side. So the cell splits into two, giving you two new cells. Now, these new cells are called what type of cells? And there's a name given to them. The original cell is called the parent. So the two new cells that are formed after the split are called what? It starts with the letter D. What do you call those cells? Right, O'Brien, correct. Those are called the daughter cells. So in mitosis, you start off with one parent, but you end up with how much daughters? Two daughters. Now, remember, if you look at the flow chart over here, remember, I told you all you started off with 4 chromosomes. If you look carefully, you see 4 chromosomes. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 already supposed to represent the 46 chromosomes. You notice the daughter cells end up with 4. So in other words, each daughter cell has how much chromosomes? 46. In mitosis, there is no reduction in the amount of chromosomes. You start off with 46, you end up with 46. Another quick question. Are the daughters identical to the parents? Are the daughters and parents genetically equivalent or genetically the same? I mentioned this in the homework. Are the parent and daughters genetically identical? The answer is yes, because not only do they have this, each have 46 chromosomes, the 46 chromosomes are unchanged. They are exact copies of the parent, exact copies. So in other words, if somebody were to give you the parent cell underneath a microscope, a real powerful microscope, like you could see all the chromosomes, exact, and somebody were to give you the daughter cell, you won't be able to tell the difference. You just won't be able to. All right, so that's a brief revision of mitosis, which has nothing to do with sexual reproduction. Right, and you know why mitosis has nothing to do with sexual reproduction? Remember, I said that this happens in cells like your nose, because when the cells replicate themselves, you want the cells to be identical, because remember, you're growing a nose. You want all the cells in a particular part of your nose to look the same. This is an example. You don't want one part of your nose to be brown and then the next part of your nose to be yellow, because remember, the cells are what will determine the characteristics of your nose. So you want all the cells that are replicating to look exactly the same, because you're building one structure, right? So let's move on. The other version of cell division is meiosis, okay? Now, meiosis, right? Let me just summarize this here. This guy here is the parent cell. Now, you notice the parent cell, I drew 4 chromosomes. We all know the 4 represents a total of 46 chromosomes, because I'm too lazy to draw all 46. Everything ends over here. You notice the daughter cells. Don't worry, I'll go through the process. But the point is, look at where the daughter cells end up. In the daughter cells, we only have how much chromosomes are in each daughter cell? Let me know in the chat. Do a comparison. If 4 in my diagram, if 4 chromosomes represents the realistic value of 46 chromosomes, the daughter cells only end up with, in my picture, 2 chromosomes. So how much chromosomes do the daughters have in total at the end of meiosis? 23, correct, right? So sex cells, and these are sex cells. It doesn't matter if we're talking about sperm here or we're talking about eggs. The daughters have 23 chromosomes. And whenever a cell only has 23 chromosomes, they are called haploid cells. HA is for half the amount of chromosomes. But let's go through the process here. By the way, every time mitosis occurs, a different combination of daughters will appear, which is good. You want meiosis to be a kind of random process. Every time it happens, you never, ever, ever want the daughters to come out exactly like the parent. The daughters must always be different every single time it happens in the body. So let's see what happens. It's time for the parent to do what? The parent cell to split into two. So the chromosomes replicate themselves. They turn into little X's. But here's what. Look at what happens to the chromosomes. Remember in mitosis, the chromosomes would line up on top. Sorry, I'm going to draw that a little better for you. That looks like an X. The chromosomes would line up on top of each other. But look at mitosis. Do the chromosomes line up on top each other? No. They line up, they pair up and line up side by side. Now remember, all human beings, right? It took a male and a female to make us, a mother and a father. So they don't just randomly pair up. They pair up in such a manner that one from the father and one from the mother line up next to each other. So that's a big difference. In mitosis, they line up on top of each other. In meiosis, they pair up and then they line up on top of each other. But here's what, if you all look closely over here, right? Since the mother and father, one from the mother and one from the father, are pairing up, they kind of touch each other. Isn't it fair to say some of the genetic material from the mother will be scraped off and passed on to the father? You call that crossing over. And in the homework, I described it as paint. Pretend the blue one is blue paint and the pink one is pink paint. And it's wet paint. So if the two of them touch each other, the paint will get what? Swapped a little bit. So in other words, some of the genetic material here gets exchanged. Now here's the thing. Every time this happens, do you think the same genetic material will get exchanged? Well, what do you think? Every time this happens, and it happens thousands of times probably in a person's lifetime. Right. Every single time it happens, the genetic exchange will be different. And it cannot be predicted of how the crossing over process will occur. So what happens next, right? Look at what happens next. After the crossing over phase occurs and the genetic material exchanges, now if you look closely, right, you will see the blue has some pink here and the pink has some blue. That's supposed to denote that some genetic material has been exchanged. So the two of them now separate from each other after the crossing over phase and they split up into two. But only half of the chromosomes go to this side and only half of the chromosomes will go to this side, which means here has 23 and here has 23. Now, I want to point out something. This part of the process is random because we cannot predict how the genetic material will be exchanged. But it's also random in a second way. Tell me something. Look at these two cells down here. This one and this one. Now I'll put two big arrows here. Keep your eyes on these two. Tell me something. Did the blue have to be on this side? And does the pink chromosome have to be on that side? Suppose it was the other way around. If the pink what came first and the blue came after, and then it split, would these two cells look exactly the same? Or would the pink be here and would the blue be here? In other words, would these two cells have the same chromosomes in it if the alignment was different in the phase above? What do you all think? No, okay. And it would look different. It would look completely different because if the pink was on this side and the blue was on this side and then it split, and this one would be pink, but we will still have the what? Light blue here, and then we would have bright blue here and this pink. Now we're assuming that only the one on top is switching positions. Like when it was lining up, it just lined up what? Different. So, and remember, it's 46 of these. It's 23 pairs in all. So every time the chromosomes are lining up or pairing up before they split, right? It's really, really hard to predict how they will line up, who will come first and who will go second. So how these two cells are produced, like the patterns of chromosomes, are also random. You call that the random orientation. Orientation just means who comes first, whether the pink one will come first or the blue one will come first. And well, you all see what's going to happen here. Then when these two form, it's going to split. Each one is going to split into two. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4 daughter cells. And here's the thing, right? These things are either sperm cells and these or egg cells. And every time a male produces sperm and a woman produces eggs, the daughter cells always look different. So when the sperm comes in eventually comes in contact with the eggs, check out how much randomness has occurred there. So that's why every single child looks different because it's always a random, how you say, chromosomes coming, 23 random chromosomes coming in contact with 23 random 23 chromosomes in the eggs. And that is why all children look different. They always have some differences in them. All right, so I know I tried to squeeze it in there in about 10, 15 minutes, but that's the best I could do right now. All right, so did that refresh your memory, guys, on mitosis and meiosis? Right, and here is a summary of the differences between mitosis and meiosis. Give it a proper read, guys. You have this in the notes, but read it back here today. Let me know when you are finished. Right, so remember, meiosis is random and a very popular question in the exam. They just ask you how meiosis is random. Just even though you read it just now, the crossing over is when the two chromosomes do what? They come close to each other and genetic material gets what? Exchanged. And that's always random. You can't figure out what's going to be exchanged there. And also the random orientation. That means when you don't know which chromosome is going to end up on which side. Either the black one could come first or the pink one, or the pink one could come first and the black one could come after, right? And when it splits, obviously it will create a different combination of cells. All right, so we're officially on question 4. Get started, guys. Send answers. Try your best, right? like I said, this is your chance to try and, push yourself and test yourself. Good luck. I'll give you, I think 5 minutes should be more than enough. Now, you see, when people hear the word meiosis, that's the one with sexual reproduction, the first thing that comes to mind is 23 chromosomes, because we saw at the end, keyword here, at the end of the meiosis process, each daughter cell had 23 chromosomes. But didn't it start off with 46? At the beginning of the procedure, it had 46. It's just the end of it has 23. I find they could have phrased this a little better. The first answer is 46, meaning that at the beginning of the procedure is 46, but then each daughter cell contains at the end 23. So this was poorly phrased. All right. So part B, meiosis and meiosis occur in human cells. All right, true. Meiosis occurs in only one type of cell, while mitosis occurs in other types of cells. Well, part one, name the type of cell in which meiosis occurs. That's the sex cells, but also gamete cells or gametic cells. Okay, sex cells will give you full marks in the exam. State two differences between mitosis and meiosis. You had a table just now with a whole set of differences between mitosis and meiosis. So you could state any two, right? You could summarize it to any, whichever two you want, right? Right. And then part C, right? The zygote is when there's an that's a zygote is when the sex cells combine, when a sperm cell combines with a egg cell. Now, when both of them combine, you're supposed to have 46 chromosomes in all, right? You're supposed to have 46 for the developing baby. But sometimes you end up with one extra chromosome, right? You end up with 47. This is not a good thing, right? You might think having more chromosomes is better, but it's not, right? And the name of this disease is, or condition, it's not really a disease, it's a condition, right? Is Down syndrome, right? I'm not too sure why I put the answer quite here, right? But it's Down syndrome. Right. Well, I'm glad everyone got but the majority of this question correct. All right, so let's move on. All right, so the next question deals with a menstrual cycle. So let me do a quick revision over here. I want everyone to turn to their notes where we started to talk about the menstrual cycle. Find it. Let me know when you have it in front of you. Right. So the menstrual cycle, menstruation is about the cycle is roughly 28 days, right? This is just a rough average, right? So it's broken up into 4 phases. Now, if you're going different textbooks, you're going to see slightly different values, right? Remember, these are just averages, right? Every human, well, every female on Earth is different, right? Right? So the menstruation cycle is usually the first 5 days. Some diagrams will have it as the first 7 days. After, let me put it here, this is the first phase, right? So we start in here. Then after you have the follicular phase, which is usually the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days. That's the second phase. And then after you have the ovulation phase. The ovulation phase is when the egg gets released, right? Usually from here all the way to over here, the egg is just being developed, right? The egg is being created. But once the egg has been created, it will be released. And that's the ovulation days. That's the best time period of when a sperm has a chance to come in contact with the egg, right? For fertilization to occur. That's the best window. And after that, everything else after is called the luteal phase. So you must know the name of the phases and have an average of the amount of days each one is, right? And everyone should have this diagram in their books already. So let's go through this in a little bit more detail, right? Let's take a look at what goes on in the ovary, right? And the different hormones involved. So in case you can't remember, the ovary is over here, right? That's your ovary here. And this here is an enlargement of it. At the beginning of the menstrual cycle, right? Remember, inside of the ovary, the egg is being created. Now, the egg just doesn't magically appear. It takes time to form and grow. But how does the ovary know it's time to create an egg? Well, there's a hormone. Remember, hormones are chemicals in the body, and your body has so many different hormones in it. But your hormones basically visit different parts of the body, and it will tell or instruct that part of the body to do something. At the beginning of the menstrual cycle, there is a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone, abbreviated to FSH, right? I believe this hormone is created at the front part of your brain, right? And it will be sent to your ovary by the bloodstream, right? The FSH hormone will be created in the front of your brain. It will be dumped into your bloodstream, into your veins and arteries and whatnot, and it will be shipped to your ovary. Now, when your ovary receives this hormone, remember the hormones is a messenger. It's going to instruct the ovary to do something. It will tell the ovary, hey, it's time to begin making an egg. Now, a lot of people know the word egg, right? But they're not familiar with the word follicle because you don't really use that word in everyday talking, right? But you see this tiny little dot over here? That tiny little dot is the egg. The egg develops inside a structure called the follicle, right? So if you look at it, at the beginning of the menstrual cycle, right? The egg inside of the follicle, look at the dot. It's getting larger and larger and larger. And then eventually, right? The egg is going to be released. The follicle stays inside of the ovary, but just ejects the egg out into the fallopian tubes. So the egg gets released into the fallopian tubes. Now, here's the thing. For the follicle to eject the egg into the fallopian tubes, it needs a hormone to tell it to do that. The name of that hormone is the luteinizing hormone, LH hormone, right? And then the follicle remains inside of the ovary. Now, a lot of people think the follicle is just used to develop the egg, but it has other uses. You see, the follicle produces another hormone called progesterone. Progesterone actually helps the lining of the uterus to develop and get thicker and thicker and thicker. Quick question. If no fertilization occurs, in other words, if a sperm does not come in contact with the egg, will the uterus need to get thicker and thicker and thicker? Hear the question again. If the egg is not fertilized, will there be a need for the uterus lining to get thicker and thicker and thicker? What do you all think? The answer is no, right? So you all are correct. Because if no fertilization occurs, then no baby is going to be what? Created. And the purpose of having a very, very, very thick uterus lining is to help support the growth of that baby. So if no fertilization occurs, the follicle will die. Because the purpose of the follicle was to do what? Create the progesterone to support a future baby. But if fertilization does occur, right, the follicle does not die. It will continue living to what? Create progesterone, right? Right. By the way, the part of the follicle that creates the progesterone is something called the corpus luteum. That's part of the follicle, by the way. Okay, so, and you need to memorize the names of these hormones for the exam, and it is real ask you questions on it. So let's move on to the next slide, something that will look a little bit scary, right? But give everything here a read, right? Read through the flow charts and whatnot, right? And then we'll discuss a little bit, right? Oh, by the way, I made a slight mistake, right? This here is the follicle, but when the follicle releases the egg, it changes into something called the corpus luteum, which produces the progesterone hormone, right? So I made a slight error in describing it at that point. Anyway, read through everything, take 5 minutes, and then I want to ask you some questions on it. Quick question. According to this chart over here, right? This diagram here, is this person, has fertilization occurred? Is there a baby on its way? According to these diagrams here and these hormone levels, is a baby on its way? Right? Remember, right? Even if I don't have this part over here, let's say I were to erase this part here, right? Well, let's get something here. Let me say I didn't have this part over here, right? So let me pretend coffee fall on it and I can't see what's going on there. If you look at the progesterone levels, right? You notice the progesterone levels went up. That is natural. That will always happen, right? It's getting itself ready to thicken the uterus lining, right? Like it's getting ready, right? But then it drastically what? Drops down. So if the progesterone level begins to drop, then the uterus has no intention of continuing to thicken the uterus lining, right? For those who got it wrong, you think you understand it? If fertilization had occurred, right, what would have happened? The progesterone levels would have keep rising higher and higher throughout the pregnancy. It would have never ever do what? Drop. And the same thing goes for the estrogen, right? Progesterone helps to thicken the lining, but estrogen helps to repair the lining. So estrogen would also be useful in during a pregnancy. So if the person was pregnant, right, the estrogen levels would also rise. Progesterone and estrogen helps to thicken and repair the uterus lining. All right, so for people who got it wrong, you think you understand it now, and this is a very popular question. They'll give you the charts with the estrogen and progesterone levels. And anytime you see them, if at the end of the menstrual cycle, it drops, both of them drops, then no fertilization occurred, right? Great. Right, so let's move on, right? Let's see some questions now. Let's continue with the past paper question. All right, good luck with this one. It's only two answers, part one and part two. Menstruation is at the beginning, right? And it's used, well, according to this diagram, right, it's 1 to 7 days. Now, some people might say 1 to 5 days. Yeah, the examiner will give you either of them correct, right? Because menstruation occurs when the wall lining, the lining of the uterus breaks down. So if you notice, it starts over here, it tick over here, and then the thickness what? Gradually decreases. So it starts at the first day. Obviously, it's 1 day, right? But when does it end, right? So everybody's going to interpret this different because it only starts to build up after the 7th day. Some people might say 1 to 6 days. Some people might say 1 to 5. The examiner is not going to treat you too, he's not going to be too hard on you for that, okay? So 1 to 7 days or 1 to 6 days, 1 to 5 days, okay? Cool. What occurs within the ovary as the wall of the uterus begins to thicken, and during which days of the cycle does this happen? Now, the walls of the uterus begins to thicken from here all the way up to here, right? So let's see what happens there, right? During that period, that's when the follicle containing the egg develops. So during that phase, right, remember the FSH would have been released to tell the ovary, hey, it's time to what? Create an egg, right? And the thickening occurs between what? 17, well, to 14 days, right? It actually goes up a little bit more. Now, this one is a tricky question, right? But do me a favor. I want to make sure I answer correct. During what occurs within the ovary wall, right? Right. So I will stick with this answer to 7 to 14 days. I know some people might say 7 to what? 26 days, because that is what the chart shows, right? But if you say from 7 to 26 days, you'll have to alter this answer a little bit. Not only will the egg within the follicle be developed, the egg will also be released. So here's what I want to modify my answer. I don't think my answer is totally correct because thickening occurring between here all the way to here. So according to this diagram is what? 7 to 26 days, right? The follicle containing the egg develops and the egg will be released. All of that will happen between the 7th day to the 27th day, right? I think that's a better answer, and I'm changing my answer to that. Right. Between 14 to 28 days, what pattern can be seen with the hormones, the ovarian hormones, right? 14 to 28 days. 14 to 28 days. Right? One of them is estrogen and the other one is progesterone. So that's basically asking you that 14 is somewhere around here and 28 is here. They're basically asking to describe the shape of the graph here, right? So let me show you my answer, right? Right? In both cases, right, the estrogen rised and dropped and kind of rise, but then drop again, right? And the progesterone is the same thing. The progesterone begin to rise and then it begin to what? Drop. Right? To be honest, I don't think that was worth 4 marks. It was up to me. I just give you 2 marks for that. But the examiner was being generous. Let's go. part 4, right? So good luck with this one and send your answers on the chat. Let's see what I got. Which pituitary hormone controls ovulation? Right. I know you all have gotten tricked with this one, right? The FSH hormone, which is what most people put for this answer. What does the FSH hormone do? The FSH hormone, right, only tells the ovary to start making the egg. Is making the egg the same thing as ovulation? No, ovulation is when it releases the egg into the fallopian tubes. So making an egg and then eventually releasing the egg is two completely different things. Remember when we had the flow chart, it's the LH hormone that triggers or tells the ovary to release the egg. The release of the eggs is called ovulation. On which day this usually happens? Usually around day 14. I know I gave you a time frame, right? If we go back to the chart, right, of when ovulation occurs, let's go back to the first chart, right? Ovulation, right, occurs between 12 to 16 days. Around that time, the LH hormone will say, hey, release it into the fallopian tubes. But usually, you notice this one has a darker color, day 14. Usually it occurs most of the times on day 14. It can be 12 to 16 days, but usually right in the middle for most people, the 14th day is when ovulation will occur in most cases, right? Right. And I also mentioned, well, they don't have the LH hormone here. They don't have any levels. So day 14 is a safe answer. Right. So I'm glad we cleared up that. All right. So we're officially on question 5. We're doing good so far, guys. So send some answers for part A, part 1, and part 2. Right. So dengue is by an infected female mosquito. Now, it's the thing about it then, the Aedes aegypti, the Aedes, right? Right? The aegypti mosquito. It's the female mosquito that spreads the dengue. So you have to make sure and say that, right? And some of the symptoms, there are a few symptoms you can quote from the table itself: headaches, muscle and joint pain, fatigue, and what? Weakness. So that would have been straight out of the table. In fact, I just copy and pasted the answer from the table. Explain how a mosquito spreads dengue. Well, well, at the end of the day, right, the female mosquito becomes infected with the dengue virus, and you know how it does it, right? But when it bites, when it's in the mosquito bites the person, it really injects, and the blood basically gets mixed. It's basically a blood transfusion at the end of the day, right? So give it a read. I don't think this one is too difficult to understand. I basically summarized the answer already. Next part B. Right, so give this a read, and one is worth 3 marks, the other one is worth 6 marks. Garbage can be a source of harmful bacteria, obviously, viruses and parasites. When consumed or are ingested accidentally, these pathogens are basically things that cause diseases and whatnot, that try to invade your body, can cause gastrointestinal infections leading to symptoms such as diarrhea and vomiting, right? So basically the garbage are attracting parasites, and the parasites are going to be really good at transmitting all of these diseases and viruses and whatnot. Great. Suggest 3 measures that the community could take to prevent the spread of the diseases. Well, Obviously, hygienic and sanitation practices promote regular, but a lot of people said, right, to wash your hands properly and regularly, right? Especially when handling food and after using the washroom. Vector control. In case you don't know what a vector is just an organism or even a virus that transmits the diseases, right? So obviously you want to control the amount of rats and houseflies in the community, right? So you want to try to keep their surroundings as clean as possible, right? Even though the garbage is being piled up somewhere in the village, you want to at least keep your compound and surroundings as clean as possible, right? Great. And vaccination programs. All right, so you try to get vaccinated against things like rotavirus and gastroenteritis, and there are vaccines for all of these things in case you come in contact with these vectors. Right, so I'm going to spend too much time on this one. Like I said, most persons had great suggestions. Some people said use disinfectants, like when you're cleaning your counter surfaces on your house, around your house, use disinfectants and whatnot, which is a good idea. Let's move on. Anyway, on to question 6. look how fast we are here. Define the term. I believe this is the last question because our past paper only has 6 questions. So I know we're running out of time, so let's see. Part A. Define the term pollution and give one example of a water pollutant. This is straight out of your notes. We did this topic, like pollution and how to keep the place clean and thing. We did this the last few weeks in November going into December. So let's quickly go through this. Pollution is the introduction of harmful materials into the environment. Water pollution, right? So examples, industrial discharge. When you have those big factories and industries with all those waste products and whatnot, right? They're supposed to be properly disposed. But sometimes, unfortunately, all of these materials, waste products, they dump it straight into the oceans or straight into the rivers and streams, which is obviously illegal, but it does happen, right? Part 2, describe the process of eutrophication. Let me explain let's quickly draw this out. Let's say that we did this in the Wednesday class. How much people were able to make the Wednesday class? I know I went through this. This is when you have a lake, right? And you have algae growing in the lake, okay? Now, algae likes to feed on oxygen and nutrients. So sometimes fertilizer from farms get washed into the stream. And the same nutrients in the fertilizer, like nitrates and phosphorus and these things, algae loves it. So the algae begins to feast on the fertilizers that were washed into the streams, and the population begins to grow, the algae, and then it forms this thick blanket of algae at the top of the lake, and it prevents sunlight from entering into the lakes. And not only that, the algae uses up all the oxygen dissolved in the water, which fish need, which plants need, and plants also need the sunlight. So when you have this process is called eutrophication. So the thick blanket of algae blocks the sunlight and uses up all the oxygen in the lake there, and anything that depends on it, like fish and plants, all of them die out, and only the algae survived, right? So that's a bad thing, obviously, right? That's not a good thing. And here I have the description here. Give it a read and let me know when you are finished. Right. Heavy rains cause flooding, obviously, in farmland areas in a Caribbean country, right? Explain why members of your community will become ill after eating vegetables from the flooded areas. And not only this, right? State two measures that can be used to prevent the illness. Now, it's common practice, like whenever a huge flood occurs on the farm, you have to be very, very careful about consuming the products that was involved in the flood. And the thing about it, contamination. Remember, flood waters could contain sewage, right? And imagine all of that gets washed on the vegetables, like the carrots and the baigans and what else, the tomatoes and whatnot, right? So that can definitely get someone very, very ill. Also, bacteria loves flooded, moist regions. So imagine you have carrots soaked for weeks, or not even weeks, not even takes weeks, days in flooded waters. Bacteria will just begin to grow all over the vegetables, right? And if a person consumes that, they're going to get pretty what? Ill. Okay? Right? So to reduce the risk of it, because they also ask us, hey, how are we going to deal with this situation if it occurs, right? Just read the blue one. The blue one should obviously be what? Common sense. You have to wash the vegetables very, very good. You want to boil it, make sure it's in boiling water, stuff like that. Give it a read. Let me know when you are finished. I don't want to spend too long on this. Right. So same question, heavy rains and whatnot, but this is B part 2. Your class is required to test the flood water for bacteria. Describe the test, right? So this here is the test. So let's look at the diagram first. There is this substance called agar. What is agar? A-G-A-R. Agar is a highly nutritious substance for bacteria. Bacteria just loves it. So what you do, you get a plate of agar, and then you take a sample of the water and you drop it in the agar. Now remember, the contaminated water is going to have the bacteria in it. And the bacteria is going to start to feed on the agar. And the population of the bacteria is going to grow, grow, and grow. Now remember, when you now take the sample of water, it would only have a little bit of the bacteria. And you can't really see that with your naked eye. However, when the bacteria begins to eat and grow its population over and over and over, the bacteria population, because it's so much bacteria, is going to be visible to the naked eye. And different bacteria will look differently, will have different colors and whatnot in it. So when you do this, right, and you look at the pattern being created by the growing population of the bacteria, an experienced person can say, hey, it's this type of bacteria, or it's that type of what? Bacteria. Right? So everything that I just said here is in this explanation. Give it a read. Let me know when you are finished. Right. And we're finished. All right, guys. So how would you all rate June 2014? Obviously, next week we're starting June 2015. Do you all think it was a doable paper? What do you all